I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining in from Winnipeg today, snowy Winnipeg in April. Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Red River Métis. This land is also the traditional territory of Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. As we gather to talk about program evaluation today, it's important to recognize that evaluation, how we define success, whose voices are included, and what knowledge counts, has not always been neutral. Too often, Indigenous communities have been evaluated without leadership or consent through frameworks that did not reflect priorities or ways of knowing for those communities. Acknowledging the land is one small step toward recognizing those histories. It's also an opportunity to invite us to think more carefully about how we design and conduct evaluations so that they are collaborative, respectful of Indigenous data sovereignty, grounded in relationships with communities. I'm grateful to be able to do this work on this land and alongside communities who continue to teach us about accountability, reciprocity, and learning. And what you're seeing right there is my dog in one of the places in Winnipeg. It doesn't look like this today. This is a beautiful prairie park that is currently covered in lots of snow, but this is Beaudry Provincial Park in just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I'd like to begin today with a story. In 2014, I walked around an auditorium of 80 young people, and I was collecting their surveys back for an evaluation I was conducting. I was evaluating their gender and sexuality diversity allyship program. Before I left, I looked down at the surveys and I noticed most were returned blank. As I walked out, I was stopped by a young person who had suggestions for the evaluation. They said they were uncomfortable with the way I had categorized gender. I almost fell over. Even while telling this story, I still get goosebumps every time. I had made at least one serious error. I didn't involve any program stakeholders, particularly the youth participants or program staff or even the funders in my evaluation planning. It was at that point that I knew I had to do better as an evaluator. So doing better as an evaluator brought me my quest that led me to the University of Ottawa, where evaluation scholars like Brad Cousins and Katherine Moreau were using participatory and collaborative evaluation approaches to engage stakeholders in education and community-based program evaluations. And I'll turn the slides over to Katherine now to continue.
So we know that these approaches involve trained evaluators working in partnership with stakeholders, including marginalized populations throughout the evaluation process. And this is often to encourage realistic problem solving and the creation of knowledge and to ground data in the unique perspectives of these stakeholders or interest holders. There's a good deal of literature we know on collaborative and participatory evaluation. So for example, evaluation scholars have published on specific approaches for carrying out collaborative and participatory evaluation. And as we see in this diagram, there are two participatory approaches that most of us are familiar with, and that's transformative participatory evaluation and practical participatory evaluation. Also listed are 4 collaborative evaluation approaches, such as developmental evaluation, empowerment evaluation, stakeholder-based evaluation, and school-based evaluation. More recently, we know that evaluation scholars have moved away from conducting research on specific approaches and instead are arguing for a more common set of principles for collaborative inquiry, identifying indicators of successful collaborative and participatory evaluations, and using critical frames to examine this field of work. In contrast, research on youth involvement in collaborative and participatory evaluation has paid relatively little attention to the specific approaches for evaluating youth programs or for meaningfully involving youth in evaluation. Most of the literature instead focuses on the rationales and strategies for engaging youth, distinctions between youth-involved and youth-led evaluations, and case studies on youth-led evaluations. Interestingly, we've only found one source that discussed the specific use of collaborative evaluation approaches with youth, so we know that they're not being included. Of the collaborative and participatory approaches that we highlighted for you, we now turn to David Fetterman's empowerment evaluation, otherwise known as EE. So EE is defined as a collaborative evaluation approach that is primarily concerned with empowering, illuminating, and building program beneficiaries' self-determination. In this approach, evaluators often act as facilitators and teach stakeholders how to conduct their own evaluation. What makes EE particularly unique and attractive is its three-step approach. So what are those three steps? So we have step number one, which focuses on establishing the mission. The group that's come together to work on the evaluation gets together to clearly define the program's mission. This involves identifying the shared goals and values that guide the program and ensuring that everyone has a common understanding of what the program is trying to achieve. Step two is taking stock. Next, the participants assess the current state of the program. They reflect on what's working well, where improvement needs to happen, and how the program of activities are currently supporting the mission of the program. Then comes step three, where we're planning for the future. The group develops strategies and action plans to strengthen the program. This includes setting priorities, identifying resources, and determining how progress will be monitored over time as we move forward with the program. So Sarah and I hypothesized that EE was very well suited for engaging youth in program evaluation, particularly because of those three steps that they could easily follow. We believed that EE would value and respect youth programming perspectives and allow them to make equal decisions as partners in the evaluation process, while the evaluator played a critical friend role and someone who was knowledgeable about evaluation and could guide them in their evaluation processes and decision making. However, empirical research we thought was needed to better understand how to support this claim to use EE to evaluate programs and involve youth in that evaluation process. And we could not find in the literature anywhere where that had been investigated or formally documented.
So in part one of our study, we focus on evaluators' perspectives in order to understand their use of empowerment evaluation to evaluate programs and involve youth in those empowerment evaluations. In phase one, we conducted surveys with evaluators from the American Evaluation Association's Collaborative and Participatory TIG, Targeted Interest Group, and the Youth-Focused TIG. Many of you today might have participated in that survey, and we thank you very much. In phase two of our project, we then used that phase one material to interview evaluators about their experiences. And then in part two of the study, we created a case study. So we conducted an empowerment evaluation exercise with a group of young people. They agreed to evaluate their STEM educational outreach program that was run through the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Ottawa. And they agreed to be part of an EE, an empowerment evaluation, to evaluate that program. So I facilitated the empowerment evaluation exercise with the assistance of a note taker who was also a trained evaluator, and they helped to collect observations during that exercise. And then after the EE, we interviewed the youth who were involved in the EE. So I'll now get into some of the findings. This won't be all of the findings. This is a snapshot of them, but we have some of our resources that we'll give you links to at the end, and you can always look into some of this more if you're interested. So what we wanted to do is approach the findings today by looking at the value of EE as an approach for program evaluation, the value of EE as a strategy for meaningfully involving youth in program evaluation. And then our newest piece of work has looked at empowerment evaluation as a way to teach young people about program evaluation. So that's how we'll kind of unpack the story of the findings. So evaluators who used EE and labeled themselves as an empowerment evaluator often discuss their use of EE as related to a higher calling. And this quote from one of our participants really explains this. When you're an empowerment evaluator, you're really out there for the social justice piece. And I made my way to EE because the more I refined what I want out of my life, the more I had a personal desire to do EE. So again, we see that example of a higher calling. However, from the surveys and interviews, we learned that the use of empowerment evaluation to evaluate programs that were targeted youth, they appeared to be actually quite limited. So people noted they did not use EE to evaluate those programs because of lack of stakeholder interest or lack of training or instruction in EE. Overall, the respondents appeared to suggest they didn't feel like they had a lot of knowledge in empowerment evaluation. They didn't feel like they had a lot of confidence in carrying it out. And respondents favored other approaches such as practical participatory evaluation, stakeholder-based evaluation, or using a common set of principles to undergo their evaluation rather than a specific approach. However, there were some strengths and limitations for using EE to evaluate a program. In particular, the young people that participate in the case study, when we spoke to them, they talked about these general strengths and limitations of being part of the EE. So we have some great quotes that we'll share here in the next couple of slides, but overall, the young people noted that they liked that EE focused on their views and ideas. They liked that it had a focus on improvement, and a number of people liked that it encouraged some kind of productive collaboration. At the same time, a number of young people noted that the EE required extensive participation from them. It felt like too much often during the EE. A number of young people also spoke about the EE not leading to what they felt like were immediate program changes, and they felt a bit let down by that. And then a number of young people also spoke about the focus of the requirement of collaboration didn't fit with what they were interested in doing during the EE. So we wanted to share a couple quotes from the young people that speak to those themes. So one person made this really great analogy. It's like we showed up today and the evaluator told us we were going to make a cake and brought in the ingredients, but we got to talk about the cake we wanted to make and find a recipe that fit. And we are also the ones that actually did the baking, and we'll get to eat the cake. So I think you need someone to give general direction and provide the ingredients, but really I felt like we did a lot to make the EE happen, and I'm really impressed by that. So that came from one of our young people who participated in the case study in the EE to evaluate their STEM educational outreach program, and they were 14 years old. Some other quotes from young people from that experience. The only thing that came out of today is a report, and what's a report going to do? The evaluator just takes all this info and writes a general report rather than just telling it like it is. That's a problem because if they don't listen, then what? I felt left out for the whole day, like my opinion didn't matter at all. Like, what was the point of coming if I wasn't really involved at all? So I imagine you're starting to see some connections with those overall strengths and limitations. And these are some of the quotes that exemplify that. We also have quotes from young people saying today wasn't about bashing the program, it was about talking about how we could improve the program and make it even better by expanding what we liked and making better what we didn't. I got to give a lot of input on how the past 10 weeks went and give insight on how to improve the program. I was really impressed by how much I had to say, and it was interesting to see how it all got used for the better.
So then we came back to some key considerations that we thought others should know about when using EE with youth. So from the evaluator's perspective, we found that it was important to have some foundational knowledge of EE, but also remain flexible in the evaluation process itself, and to have very strong facilitation skills. Evaluators also need to invest time in recruiting and meaningfully engaging the youth, ensuring that the participation is authentic rather than just tokenistic. And then from the organizational or funder perspective, there needs to be clear commitment to supporting youth involvement. This includes identifying interested youth, providing staff with time to do so, and incentives to help recruit the youth, and recognizing both the benefits and limitations of such an approach. Overall, we felt that successful youth engagement in EE requires capacity, organizational support, and a genuine willingness to want to act on youth's insights. So one way we thought, and I'll get started, turn to the next slide, one way to put some of these considerations into action would be to revise the EE steps. In particular, we've added 3 more steps to support youth to act as co-evaluators in EE. So these steps are highlighted in gray in the table that you see here and include the recruitment of youth to take part in the EE, a discussion of the collaborative agenda and the establishment of collaborative guidelines for working together during the EE, and the dissemination and use of evaluation findings, including the sharing of evaluation findings with the program staff and the administrators with the intention of implementing program change. We felt that these added steps were meant to solidify that youth need to be a part of defining their roles and also defining the evaluators' roles within the EE, which may mean discussing, rethinking, or resisting the other essential components of EE itself.
So when that's really the focus on the practical considerations. When we think about more the theoretical implications of what we found for that study, we noted that when EE is used to evaluate programs involving youth, program stakeholders appear to be deeply involved in the EE activities. So respondents noted that youth may be included in this group of program stakeholders and provided an opportunity to complete EE activities in collaboration, so not on their own, but in collaboration with program managers, directors, staff, and other program beneficiaries. So for respondents who do use empowerment evaluation to evaluate programs involving youth, youth were involved to some extent in a few evaluation activities in order to teach young people about evaluation and to produce more authentic and useful results. However, we found that both the evaluators and the young people noted that they didn't feel like they were conducting the evaluation on their own, that the role of the critical friend was really meaning that they were working alongside as co-evaluators, alongside adult stakeholders like that critical friend, like that evaluator in the evaluation. So this is an important theoretical acknowledgement, because if we look at the youth involvement in collaborative program evaluation continuum, and this continuum has been developed and worked on quite a bit by Montrose Moorhead and their team, and Richard Schuster and a number of researchers that they've worked with. If we think about this continuum, then we're not really seeing young people in empowerment evaluation working as co-evaluators, but really working more alongside and instructed by their the critical friend, the evaluator. So we've added this additional step to the, or aspect to the continuum, to look at what meaningful involvement looks like in empowerment evaluation, and really distinguish that from other participatory approaches like transformative participatory evaluation, or youth participatory evaluation that is really youth-led, where we have the young people making a number of decisions without working alongside the adult stakeholders. In particular, evaluators spoke about this. So like this evaluator discussed how their role as a critical friend in the empowerment evaluation may have disrupted meaningful involvement in the evaluation for the young people. So they said with youth, you don't always know what they're going to say. So you need to provide them with space to think, to draw and process, and respond the way they are comfortable with, even if it's not the way you would expect or have seen before. And so there's the notion that sometimes the empowerment evaluation steps might impose too much structure that's not actually allowing that creativity and that space to meet young people where they are. So I mentioned that we wanted to go through the findings by looking at empowerment evaluation as an evaluation strategy, empowerment evaluation as a way to engage young people in evaluation, and our newest piece of work, a piece that just came out in the American Journal of Evaluation this week focuses on how empowerment evaluation can be used to teach young people about evaluation. So we examined this potential, and we particularly used case study and follow-up interview data with young people to look at how their experiences were about learning evaluation. So what we found is that youth demonstrated emerging understanding of evaluation's purpose, of evaluation's process, and the relational dynamics of evaluation because of their participation in EE. So they learned what evaluation is by engaging in evidence generation and decision making through those structured steps of EE. They learned how it works by navigating through those structured structured sequential steps. And they learned about how their role through the empowerment evaluation came out through their voice, through the validation, but also through exclusion and sometimes social risk through their participation. So collectively, these reflections highlight EE's pedagogical potential, but also its limitations in teaching empowerment evaluation or teaching evaluation to youth. For supporting evaluative learning, and in particularly in these short format contexts, because that's what the case study was for us. It was a one-day experience versus a longer, maybe youth-led process, or a longer, maybe TPE, transformative participatory evaluation process. So I know we've given you a lot to think about in this short period of time. And again, I'm happy to say this is just a snapshot of some of our findings. We did want to, and I can put the links in the chat, share with you that this information is in published journals. So we've got both the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation and the Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation. And as I mentioned, that newest piece just came out this week in the American Journal of Evaluation. So I'll post those links in the chat. You're welcome to check out those resources. But speaking for Katherine and I would also be happy to answer any questions if we've given you some food for thought, either through email, and we're happy to engage in that discussion now. So thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it.